Hello, I'm David Lucy. Today I'm going to be talking you through the new DMA's Measurement Framework 101. Today we're going to be covering why frameworks are important, what you need to consider when putting one together, and of course some watch outs and caveats for the whole process. Firstly, why does this even matter? Measurement frameworks allow us to demonstrate the value of our marketing to budgeting decision makers and key stakeholders within any business. It will aid future business and communication decisions for both you and your clients. It provides you with robust data sources, allowing you to write better award entries, including for the DMA awards. And of course, no campaign is a failure if you learn from it, and it gives you a platform on which you can learn to grow and optimize the activity. The basics for approaching a measurement framework that you need to consider when putting something together. Firstly, you are agnostic. Treat everything the same and don't approach measurement with any bias. That could be media channel bias, it could be anything else, but don't come into measurement with any preconceptions. For example, if you've run a TV campaign, don't come into measurement thinking we need to prove this TV campaign works, because that's going to skew how you approach it. Just think we need to explain what happened to the metric that we're measuring. Allocate budget and time to measurement, and failure to do so is probably the main reason for poor quality results. If you don't have any spend behind proper measurement strategies, then you're probably not going to have a proper measurement strategy. Anything down the data science approach and any brand measurement, always require a survey, which always require costs. And it's very often that we see people wanting to improve brand awareness, but without any budget behind an actual measurement strategy in order to do so. Get the gang together, and it's really important to ensure that the team are aligned early on any process. What data you're going to need, what input you're going to need from other people in order to measure this activity properly. Consider your previous results and information. Nothing happens in a vacuum, and what happened in the past can typically help you going forward. If you're trying to see a 10 percentage point uplift in consideration, and that's what you're trying to measure, but last time you did a similar piece of activity, it shifted 1 or 2 percentage points. Are you looking to measure the right metric in that case? And lastly, challenge the process and ensure that what you want to measure can be measured within the capabilities of the organization. Are they gathering the right data? Will you have share of market data if you're trying to shift share of market? All things that you need to consider. When putting your measurement strategy together and looking at what you want to be measuring, there are 4 categories that you need to consider. There'll be KPIs that can fall under each, and each way of cutting this has a separate strength and weakness. So they all have value, but in different ways. So starting with brand metrics, and as marketers, this is probably one of the things we talk about the most. This is what people think and feel about the brand. It's great in that it's an indicator of future performance. Are people becoming more aware of the brand? Are they considering using the brand? Are they likely to purchase in the next 6 months? But worth bearing in mind, these are claimed behavior, and it's not what people do, or it's not what people actually will do. And there is a big difference between the two. So there is more to look at beyond just the brand metrics. So then that moves us into response metrics, and this is where we start to get a little bit towards the pointier end of actually what is marketing driving. Starting with behavioral metrics, and this is actual behavior. How are people engaging with the brand? This could be footfall, it could be clicks, it could be comments on a social post. But this is not a true measure on a business outcome. People doing this doesn't mean they're necessarily going to purchase. Next, under the response metric bracket is commercial metrics, and this is actually what are people buying, and this is a far truer measure of an effectiveness outcome and impact on the business. What are people, how are they spending their money with your brand? And actually, this is something that you can typically attribute back to marketing. However, again, this is not necessarily a long-term indicator of success. If you've had a great year of sales, but you're seeing your consideration fall, your awareness fall because you're focusing too much on lower funnel metrics, this won't be an early morning alarm that that there could be worse times coming for the brand. And lastly, business metrics, and how is the company performing? And here we're very much in the top level, speaking about company profit and overall commercial outcomes, stock price, etc. This is the truest measure of company and brand health at that given time, but this is always typically much longer term and harder to attribute back to marketing. And the last thing to consider when thinking about the effectiveness measures and KPIs that you want to put in place are campaign delivery metrics. And we see a lot of the time people talking about the reach of the campaign or the amount of clicks or impressions delivered, the amount of ratings or reach and frequency. And these are delivery metrics and inputs to measurement, not necessarily an output. And these are not a measure of effectiveness for what your media is driving. They are, they are important. You need to do it in order to make sure your campaign is delivered, and everyone is doing their job. However, they are very different to effectiveness metrics, and anything where you can just spend more money to get more of it doesn't mean that's a sign of success. And ultimately, we need to be able to explain why the metrics that we're choosing to measure are important and how they ladder into the company's business objectives. If we're not able to explain why a growth in awareness will contribute to a growth in company profit, or how search interest or site traffic would do similar, then we need to be able to ask ourselves the question, are we measuring the right metrics, and are we looking to measure this activity in the right way? And if not, then it may be better to look to a different way or look at different metrics to focus on for your activity. When approaching your measurement, there are 5 steps that you need to consider. And there are key tasks and considerations at each stage. Firstly, what are you measuring and why? And this is where you need to identify the metrics that matter to your client's business and to the campaign, and make sure you set targets and benchmarks for this rather than just saying we want to see an increase. Then choose the right method for analysis and identify the right tools and processes that are going to help you analyze the results against your targets. Are you going to need to bring in a brand awareness survey? May you need econometrics to unpick the sales uplift that you're expecting to see? Then collect and question the data. Work out how and when and who is going to be responsible for the recording of the results and the gathering of the data. And actually thinking other people may do it may then leave you in the situation where you don't have anything to measure until right at the last minute, but then it becomes a scramble. Make the results meaningful, and you make sure you use the data to answer the initial challenge that you faced. And be honest, how did you fare against your targets? If you wanted to grow consideration, but you didn't, but actually you saw growth in another metric, be honest about that. And what does that mean for the activity and the media that you've bought and laid down, or for the creative? Is it doing a different job? And then what can we learn from that? And lastly, report it back and make sure you present your findings in a clear and meaningful way, avoiding confusing and messy graphs that are hard to unpick, or reams and reams of just data and tables that's very hard to read. So when looking to set up your measurement framework and data collection, I would recommend putting together a bit of a framework to go around this. What you're seeing on this slide is not me saying make sure you cover 8 KPIs for any campaign, 2 from business, 2 from commercial, 2 from brand, 2 from behavior. But this is just an example of how you may want to lay out your data collection and what you need to consider. What's the objective and what are we expecting to see here? What's the measurement technique? Are you going to just look at the correlation or an uplift or a regional hothouse of activity? Do you need a footfall study? What's the source of that data, and how often are you going to be looking at that data in order to measure the activity? Importantly, whose responsibility is it for gathering that data and make sure that's clear up front? And then what happened? And what did we see? And was that what we expected to see? Some things you need to bear in mind when reporting your measurement results and outcomes back. Firstly, results shouldn't come as a surprise. Clients should be involved as you're collating data along the way. And you don't want to alarm senior stakeholders with anything that's too good or bad. So make sure everyone is aware of what results are looking like as you're getting the data in. Keep the results and supporting understanding tight, and this is really important, particularly where there's larger teams that the data might want to be passed around. What's the quick, insightful snippets that you really want to land, rather than needing people to sift through 5 or 6 different graphs just to get to the end result. Really important one is don't focus on spin, and focus on what you agreed to measure, not what tells the best story. And if you do this, then that will naturally lead to you into thinking more about what can we learn from what we've measured, rather than just needing to make everything as rosy as possible. And lastly, identify what the results mean for future decisions, and not just a reflection on what's happened. And for any slide or any graph or any results that you're putting together, always ask yourself the so what question at the end. Why does this matter? And lastly, a few caveats to bear in mind when approaching measurement. Firstly, every brand and business is at a different point in its life stage. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach to these are the metrics and uplift and measurement approaches that are going to be right for every client. Secondly, the growth of an established brand will be much slower than that of an entrant. And think about, what does 1 percentage point of growth mean to your brand? That's going to be very different to a new startup, to a long-established blue chip company. The timescale and measurement and the evaluation of results will vary hugely for different categories, business and brands. Think about as well, what is the product or messaging or campaign that you are delivering. The differences between selling toothpaste and selling a car will be massive, and you'll want that to be reflected in how you're looking to measure the activity. And lastly, the cost and value of measurement will need to be proportionate to the size and ambition of the business. And I think it's important to bear that in mind. And I don't think it's right or responsible to say there's a one-size-fits-all approach, i.e. 5% of your media value should be spent on measurement. It's just important to approach that specifically to your client. How important is this specific campaign? How important the results that you're looking to get from it? And lastly, what are you trying to measure? And all of that will lead you to the right answer, to the best way of measuring your activity.